All the dogs you are watching in this video have had canine distemper, but were saved because of a treatment discovered by a little-known vet in the desert community of Lancaster, California. His name is Dr. Alson Sears, and since he made his discovery in the late 1960s, his treatment has saved hundreds of dogs from a disease that is usually fatal. Most vets and veterinary schools will tell you there is no cure, no effective treatment for canine distemper. The experts and veterinary publications won't listen to Dr. Sears yet. But I believe Dr. Sears because in 1997 he saved my dog, Galen. I'm Ed Bond. I've spent most of my adult life in journalism working for newspapers. I've been a reporter and writer, a copy editor, and a page designer. I've also taught journalism at 3 colleges. Now I have to be upfront about something. When it comes to canine distemper, I am no longer a journalist. I'm an activist. It's taken me several years to realize that for this story, I needed to be more than a reporter. I needed to stand up for Dr. Sears. Now let me tell you a little bit about him. Dr. Sears is not after money or personal glory. After he saved my dog in 1997, he was very hesitant when I approached him about writing a story about his treatment. He was not after the media attention. I just don't want to go out there again, he said at the time. He said that because when he tried to present his discovery at a veterinary conference in 1970, he was told to sit down, that his treatment was impossible. He did sit down, but then he still quietly saved hundreds of dogs with his treatment. He did let me write about it, and after it was published on the internet in 2000, I have heard from pet owners from around the US and the world whose dogs have been saved from canine distemper by Dr. Sears and his treatments. When Dr. Sears retired in 2006, it became harder for people to save their dogs, and it became clear that Dr. Sears' treatments could be lost forever unless somebody did something about it. Beginning in December 2008, some of the other owners of dogs who were saved by Dr. Sears banded together with me to campaign for him, to network and to promote his treatments. You can see these efforts on our Facebook group and on my websites. Using Dr. Sears' treatments, dogs have been saved in Florida, Georgia, Texas, California, Alberta, Canada, the Philippines, Romania, Croatia, and India. But our goal is to get his treatments published. When Dr. Sears was invited in the Rescue Ranch Animal Sanctuary in Houston, Texas, to give a lecture in October 2009, I grabbed my video cameras and flew down to Houston to be there. We spent many hours with Dr. Sears in a conference room in downtown Houston. He talked not only about canine distemper, but how his treatments could save dogs with herpes and other diseases. He even explained the implications this has for human beings. However, the video that follows will mostly focus on canine distemper. Now, I want to say something respectfully to the naysayers, the experts who told Dr. Sears to sit down, that this is impossible. Before 1928, it would have been thought impossible that something like mold could help cure disease. But then Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin. And in 1796, Edward Jenner had the insight to use material from a milkmaid infected with cowpox to perform the first smallpox vaccination on an 8-year-old boy. What he did carried a risk, and even after he documented his early successes, Jenner's ideas met with resistance from a public that did not understand. Jenner met with opposition from medical experts, political cartoonists, and religious leaders. But when his ideas were accepted by the authorities, it led to a vaccination campaign that would eventually eradicate a terrible disease from the planet. So what is Dr. Alson Sears' discovery? Here's the one-line answer. He's discovered that a vaccine designed to give chickens immunity to Newcastle disease will create a reaction that will turn off, in fact kill, the distemper virus in the dog. Now that sounds crazy, doesn't it? A chicken vaccine in a dog? Well, today it does. Maybe it sounds as crazy as it once did to use mold to cure disease. Maybe it sounds as crazy as sticking kids with one virus to protect them from another. It may sound improbable, but science will not advance by ignoring what the authorities say is improbable or impossible. In watching this DVD, we want you to be skeptical. We want you to challenge what you hear. But we ask you to also try to understand, to be fair. A cynic would say, don't bother showing me, I already know this is fake. But a skeptic would say, is this true? Really? Show me how. And so, with this DVD, let us show you how Dr. Alson Sears' treatments can save dogs from canine distemper.
A lot of open country.
I want to get a footage of you coming in the airport.
Yeah, well, it was an interesting airport. What I'm amazed at is the amount of water that's here. Golly, there were lakes and rivers, and it looks like an ocean out on that side.
Oh yeah, Houston's right on the ocean.
That we can see from the airplane out there?
You're a big fisherman, aren't you?
I am, yes, but mostly fresh water. Because that's all we have where I am is fresh water.
Right. You feeling good about being here today?
I am absolutely thrilled to be here today. I'm really looking forward to this lecture. Very definitely. See, now here we are back with medicine again. Nothing in medicine is 100%.
Exactly.
You can list all of the symptoms of the disease, and not every dog is going to have all of them.
All of them, yeah.
Some dogs only have one. Some dogs have. So there's variations in the virus, and I'll go through the variations that I've seen.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that's all there is. It's just the ones that I've seen, and it depends on your area and the breed of dog you have and what they're exposed to, as to what you're going to see. So don't think you have a disease you can tell by looking at it. And what drives me crazy is vets look at it and think they're looking at kennel cough, and they're looking at distemper.
Exactly.
Can't tell the difference.
Yeah.
Treat him for kennel cough, and of course the dog's going to die.
Right.
Right. So we saw that by the hundreds. We're talking hundreds of those. But I'll go over that with you. I'll go over all of this because it's really fascinating. And the more you learn about it, the more fascinating it becomes. And remember, everything I say is subject to change. That's the condition of viruses in mammals. Right. As quick as the mammal gets resistant to something, the virus will change and it starts all over again. I really would like to talk to vets because they're the ones that have to carry this forward. But breeders in my area are the ones that pushed it and kept it going as far as that was concerned because they were directly involved.
What would make a vet go from a non-believer to a believer? What do we have to do?
This man's emails or his blog out there showing cases, which he has one here he'll show you, showing cases recovering. A word is worth 1,000, or a picture's worth 1,000 words. And you see these animals recovered, you say, God, I don't have any of those.
That video is worth 1,000 pictures.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly right. He's got one here, it's beautiful.
This is Caliber. He's our little puppy. He's got distemper, and today is October the 12th. He developed this about a week and a half ago. He got his first little twitch, and he's currently on phenobarbital, which is controlling his back legs from twitching. As you can see, they're calm. However, it hasn't stopped the front legs from twitching. We do intend to do the Newcastle vaccine on Saturday, and from today forward I will be documenting this case to let everyone else know that there is hope. We're on our way to New Mexico. Mrs. Caliber, still cute as ever. Still got his little shakes there. The phenobarbital is keeping the back legs from shaking, which is amazing. And he's high in spirits today, although he looks sleepy now. Car ride's kind of boring. Today is October 15th, and we are on our second day of the journey to New Mexico to get these little guys the Newcastle virus vaccine. Today Caliber is doing fantastic. As you can see, he's barely twitching at all. Just his little shoulder here a little bit. Not too much though. This is my little munchkin. Today is the day that he had his treatment. He's a little sleepy, little dopey. But he's been playing a little bit. Let's look at his neck. So you can see right there the little incision that they did, and he's got a wicked looking haircut right now. I think it's coming into style for sure. Hello.
I know.
Hi, baby.
You're all bald.
Hello.
Yeah.
Oh, poor little guy.
So we'll have two little places right here, but you know, you might see a little bit of blood, but there shouldn't be a lot.
Hi, Kelly. So today is October 21st, shortly after the procedure, and this little monkey is doing so good. You can see his energy has increased like 100-fold. He just loves playing and fooling around. So does Daddy. He's having lots of fun. Look at her go. He's so cute.
Stumbled. He's like, I'm a little dizzy.
How are you doing today, Kelly Bear? Hello. Hi. Oh, give me kisses. Give everyone kisses and tell them how awesome this was. You got slobber lens. How's this twitching doing today?
Good, he's not twitching at all.
That's fabulous.
Ask your question. Can you please explain the differences and the meanings of cure, vaccine, booster,
And
and serum?
Okay, a vaccine basically is the virus that you are trying to prevent. Usually that virus has been changed so that it is not highly contagious and causing disease, although in some cases the vaccine can be hot enough to give you marginal effects. But the idea is not to make you sick, but to make you to make your immune system make antibodies against that virus. So the antibodies are flooded in your bloodstream, and if the virus makes entry to your body, those antibodies pick that virus up and destroy it, or make it available to be destroyed by cells in the body. That's a vaccine. Now, a booster is usually a second shot. For some of these diseases, a single shot is not sufficient to give you permanent immunity. And where that tends to show up is in puppies. Puppies, in most cases, will carry maternal antibody against the diseases that you are interested in. So if you vaccinate them too soon, the maternal antibodies are able to take that virus and neutralize it so that it can't cause infection. This is what prevents babies from picking up infections that are common in the area that the mother had the child in, or the puppy in for that part. So basically those particular antibodies tend to start disappearing sometime after 10 weeks of age. So between 10 weeks of age and 16 weeks of age, we feel that you go from somewhere around 35% remnants of the maternal antibodies to zero. This is the reason why you need at least 2 vaccines in the early stages of life in order to give you adequate protection. Now, a very rare group will still have some maternal antibody left after 16 weeks. This is why you give the 3rd vaccine at a year. That is to make sure that you have the immunity you're looking for going forward. So the first shot is given when we feel that statistically most of the dogs will get an effect from it. So usually 8 to 10 weeks of age the first vaccine is given. We feel that you're really immunizing about 65% of the dogs at that point. So 35% are not being immunized. So then you wait at least a month, and at 16 weeks, when you feel that you've got 99% of that maternal antibody gone, you give the second shot and you're picking up 99% of the dogs. You still have 1% that you haven't covered. So those dogs either get sick within that year or they're vaccinated again at a year, and at that year you pick up all those puppies again, which is your booster shots. So those dogs that have had previous vaccines get an increase in the amount of antibody that they're making. Those dogs that were not immunized basically pick up immunity. So that's the reason for the series of shots that are given, and that's essentially the timing that we used, was 8 weeks, 16 weeks, and a year. Now, you talk about serum. There are two types. There is the serum that has antibodies in it that is taken from an animal or a person that has already had the disease. Those people that have recovered will have very high levels of antibody in their serum. So for people or dogs that are sick, that serum can be injected, and you are basically giving them the antibody to fight the virus. Now, unfortunately, it cannot enter a cell. So if you already have the disease, that material prevents the spread, but it doesn't kill off the disease, because in virus situations, the virus is inside the cell and the antibody can't get to the virus when it's in there, which is where it does its damage. Now, there is a new serum, and it is the serum that is made from the immune systems that set off viral killing abilities on individuals that have the capability inside the cell. This is what makes the difference. An inducer is used. This is a viral type material that sets off the immune system to fight the virus. That material can be collected, it can be kept stored in a refrigerator, it can be used, and when shot into an animal, even in small quantities, it sets off the immune system to go inside the cell and kill the virus in virus diseases where this is possible to do. So the difference is that one can prevent you from getting the disease and treat you after you've had it, but not totally successful. The other can turn off the disease, usually within a very short period of time, because it can get in the cell and kill the virus or kill the cells that have the virus. So that's the distinction that you're looking for. Our major disease was distemper. And basically, we were seeing many cases, and so it became a major project for me to try to figure out how to get this situation stopped. We used all the procedures that were available to us at that time, which included the use of vitamin C in large quantities in order to try to stop the virus. Of course, this did not work. Late 1960s, actually, AHA magazine put out a little flyer that was describing treatment for feline leukemia. And he was claiming that he was making feline interferon, and that interferon in turn was causing the reduction of the virus in cats with feline leukemia. So I read the article, and I was excited because we had tried a variety of techniques to get rid of distemper unsuccessfully. And I figured here was a technique we had not tried. So his technique was pretty straightforward. He happened to be using Newcastle's disease virus as an inducer. Now, the idea behind an inducer is that this is a material that stirs up the immune system and manufactures by a variety of different kinds of cells antiviral products which work in concert to knock viruses out of the cell, so that once the virus is in the cell and trying to attach to the nucleus, with standard medications you can't get to it, but with interferon type or immune type serums you can get into the cell and stop the virus or kill it directly. So that's what we were interested in trying. So we went back to our clinic, 1969, 68, somewhere during that period of time, purchased from the local agricultural store a bottle of Newcastle's disease virus. It happened to be a Lesotho strain. Took it back to the clinic, found a donor dog, injected this material, pulled the serum out of this dog, separated it from the red cells, and put this stuff into the refrigerator. We used this material in the first case that we thought we had of distemper. It cleared literally overnight. The next day this dog had no fever, had an appetite, his nose cleared up, it didn't have pneumonia, it didn't have any other secondary problems, and we felt, we made a mistake, didn't have distemper. Mistake. So we sat on it for a week or so, and then we got some more distemper cases. So we decided, okay, let's treat these dogs. By the fifth case, it responded exactly the same way. We felt, we have something unusual. The realization hit us that we had something that was different. This was a material that was killing the distemper virus and killing it quickly. And these animals are recovering almost absolutely in front of our eyes to the point where we almost couldn't believe what we were doing. When we went back and looked at what we had, we realized that we had made a mistake in the making of this material. And in essence, we did not make interferon. Interferon is made by injecting an inducer and taking the serum from the animal at 6 to 8 hours. And that then is interferon. And there's alpha, beta, and gamma at this point, and several variations of this material. What we did, which was the big mistake, was we pulled our serum off at 11.5 to 12 hours of time, and that particular mistake made all the difference in the world. So from that point forward, we had a means of treating acute distemper. And I use that term because distemper has many secondary side effects. Primary side effects, of course, are neurologic. And it was the neurologic part of this disease which really frustrated us even after that. So this serum was not basically interferon. It was something else. To this date, I don't have a clue what that something else is. But I will tell you, it is a 10-gauge shotgun against the distemper virus. But for the cases of distemper, it works instantly and immediately and does not take large volumes of this material. We basically were using 1 cc per 10 pounds of dog plus 1 cc for the dog, so a 20-pound dog would get 3 cc's 3 times, 12 hours apart. And literally by the 3rd dose, these dogs had recovered totally, providing you got them before they had passed through the 6th day. Now the reason for that is the distemper virus is capable of doing a lot of damage to multiple cell systems, primarily the brain. And if you wait beyond the 6th day, the odds are you will recover from the systemic distemper, but you will still see neurologic problems secondary to the disease. Those dogs treated before the 6th day recover mostly. I would like to say 100%, but nothing in medicine is 100%. But figure most of them. Dogs treated after the 6th day, some of them will recover and not have problems. Most of them will end up with secondary problems. 1970, we had been treating dogs now for a couple of years with distemper serum, our distemper serum, successfully. A large meeting in Las Vegas. Dr. Ott, the premier veterinary virologist, was at the meeting and giving a lecture on distemper. And I attended that particular meeting. A room with about 300 veterinarians. Stood up, raised my hand, said, Dr. Ott, we have a way to treat distemper, and described what we had been doing. He paced up and down in front of the class for about probably a minute and a half, and he turned and faced me and said, son, that's impossible, sit down. Needless to say, I was somewhat shattered. I sat down, I left. I nursed my wounds for the next 3 months, the next 3 years. Didn't talk to anybody about it. We continued to treat cases successfully, but I wasn't interested in talking to anybody about it. And then I realized we had something the whole world needed to know about. And about that period of time, 1972, 1974, I ran into Dr. John Adams of pediatric virology at UCLA, who had recently retired. And he had a theory about MS and the function of measles virus in MS, and was looking for an animal model, and had requested of the veterinary profession that anybody that had MS, or ODE as we call old dog encephalitis cases, be brought to him so that he could study them as an animal model for MS in humans. ODE, which is old dog encephalitis, this is the neurologic form of distemper in dogs. And it occurs in a great majority of cases that survive the initial infection of distemper. Many dogs do not survive the initial infection, but those that do, the majority come down with this particular disorder, which is the virus in the brain of the dog. It causes a variety of problems. It causes optic neuritis, which is blindness on the part of the dog. It can cause a deficit, which is seizures on the part of the dog. It can cause a problem called chorea, which is twitching, which can be either one small muscle fasciculation or practically the entire dog twitching rhythmically, or it can cause an ascending paralysis. Any one of these 4 problems is secondary to the survival of the initial infection of distemper. In about 1974, we brought 8-year-old lab mix with ODE, blind and paralyzed or semi-paralyzed, to him. And I had told him that we had tried this particular material in the brains of dogs. He suggested that we try it in this particular animal in the basement of UCLA. We took the dog downstairs. The dog was anesthetized. I gave the dog NDV into the foramen magnum, and he then maintained that dog for the next 6 weeks as it recovered, and described the recovery of the dog on a day-by-day basis, which never got published. And eventually had the dog euthanized, and he had the brain photomicrographed, and of course, yes, the study is there somewhere in my notes, but never got published, which was kind of sad. So Dr. Adams believed that this particular form of distemper in the dog was an animal model for MS in humans, which is basically caused by measles virus in the brain in the human doing something very similar to what it does in the dog. In the human, you also get optic neuritis or blindness, seizuring, chorea, and I believe you can also see cases of paralysis. So at that point in time, he was very excited to have an animal model to study for the control of that particular disease, if not the cure. And unfortunately, he did something that sort of brought everything to a halt. He died. So after he died, I spent some time trying to get some humans interested in some of this work, and of course it fell through the cracks and it disappeared and it was done. Now, because I was taking him so many cases, he got kind of friendly with me, and he would send me all these articles before he published them or before they got into the medical, and I've got a whole pack of them here. And then he died, and the whole thing disappeared. And I tried to resurrect it. I talked to, there's the National Health Institute. They put me in touch with Cornell. And Cornell said, yeah, you got $500,000, we'll go ahead and put your project up. And I just laughed at that point. So I called Davis, and they gave me the same story. Yeah, come up with $500,000, we'll put your research project in. So it kind of died, and nobody else seemed to be interested. No dogs were treated for ODE again until 2006 or 2007. Where we treated 3 dogs for ODD. One was blind with seizures, the other was twitching and semi-paralyzed. These dogs are treated by a veterinarian in Southeast Asia with the NDV through the foramen magnum, and all 3 dogs have recovered. To this point, they have still shown no further signs of neurologic problems. The one that was blind regained its sight, stopped the seizures. The one that was down and paralyzed got up and walked and is still walking to this time, and they are doing fine at this point in time. So the technique does work. My understanding is there are other vets in the United States using this technique now, treating the dogs through the foramen magnum with NDV as an inducer and having success with the treatment of some of the dogs. I don't believe it's 100% successful like treating distemper in the early stages, but I think it's successful enough that it warrants giving it a try, because these dogs untreated, almost 100% death rate. It may take some time for some of them as long as 8 years, but they do die from the condition. And all of those dogs that have died, distemper inclusions have been found in the brains of these dogs, and I have photomicrographs to show that.
How many dogs do you think you've treated for distemper?
For distemper, I think I've treated probably over 600 cases.
And all of those recovered?
No, they don't all recover because some of the dogs are brought to us too late. Of those dogs we treated that were less than 6 days of illness, clinical illness, I think our success rate is in the high 90s. For those dogs that are treated after the 6th day but before the 14th day, our odds are probably 75 to 80%. For those dogs, a great majority of them will go on to develop neurologic problems. For those dogs after that period of time, the odds fall dramatically because most of them die during that period of time. Those that do survive, almost 95% or more, end up with neurologic problems, which now have a secondary treatment. But they also end up with other problems. They end up with heart pad disease, they end up with blindness, they end up with dental problems, they end up with liver problems, they end up with organ failures of a variety of kinds, skin diseases, and some of those things cannot be treated after that period of time.
Some diseases have certain stages that they go through.
Yes.
And they're proven. This is stage 1 of this. This is stage 2. What are the stages of distemper? Or are
From
you
the
able
time,
to put it down?
experimentally, from the time a dog is exposed is usually 9 to 14 days of no symptoms. Then the dog basically breaks 100%, usually with respiratory problems, catarrh, which means plugged up nose, pneumonia accompanies practically 100% of dogs that get distemper. Hard pad is one of the problems that you will see. Vomiting is probably more than half of the dogs. Diarrhea with blood probably in more than half of the dogs. Usually with that particular group, death is within the first 10 to 14 days. So you figure from 9 to 14 days from the time of exposure, no symptoms. On about day 14, they begin to show some signs of problems, and the majority of those dogs will die within the next 14 days. Of those dogs that do not die in the first 14 days, some of them will survive out to about a month, and many of those will also expire. Of those that go on to survive, they will end up with hard pad disease, which means they get holes in the pads of their feet from trying to walk with the damage that's done. They end up with pneumonia. They end up with cracking of the nose, the nasal planum. They end up with other organ deficiencies internally, and of course, almost all of them end up with some form of neurologic disease, which we've described already. So the disease is devastating from A to Z, and if there is a way which we have discovered to stop it, we would recommend using it, because the only other option is euthanasia.
Okay, whenever you talk about the dogs that have been brought to you,
Yes.
that are before the 6th day, is that 6th day of showing symptoms?
Showing symptoms,
Okay.
yes. What we call clinical symptoms are the first day the dog has a fever, and usually the fever will run over 102.5, from 102.5 to 105 degrees for dogs with distemper. They will show, all of them will get pneumonia. The pneumonia is not viral, it is secondary bacterial, which is interesting.
Right.
That needs to be treated with antibiotics. Hard pad, dental changes, skin eruptions, diarrhea, vomiting, all of these things go along with the early stages of the disease. Yes.
Okay.
And some mistakes are beneficial and some mistakes are not. In this case, the mistake was hugely beneficial, because the original interferon was discovered in 1957. I have the article on it here, and they came out with alpha, beta, and gamma, and they've used it for the treatment of a variety of human diseases. The problem with interferons is that they don't cross species lines really well. They began to grow human cells in vitro, and then putting in the inducer and pulling it off at the right time, and they could get a pure form of either alpha, beta, or gamma type interferon, depending on the cell type they used in vitro. The problem with the in vitro use of this material is it is kind of like using a 22 on a flock of birds as compared to using a 10-gauge shotgun shell. And so in vitro you're using a 22, where if you use it in the living body you're using a 10-gauge shotgun shell. And that is because there are an infinite number of immune products that are made that to date we haven't elucidated all or understand what they all do or their ability to work in concert. So I have a page here somewhere that shows 4 pages of what we knew in 2001 in small type, and that's only the beginning. This is what we knew in 2001. And since the advent of HIV, where the government has funded much of the studies, much more has been discovered since then. But as veterinarians, we're usually not privy to this. We don't usually pay attention to the little intricacies. What we want to know is, how do I treat this? What do I do? And that's what we have come here to try to explain to you. When we first made the serum back in the early 70s, we had no idea why it worked, because the use of interferon at that time did not stop distemper. This serum, which we called interferon serum, believing that we had made interferon, worked, but it turns out that it didn't have very much interferon in it. We sent samples of this to Cornell University, where they studied it in cells infected in vitro, which means in glass bottles. And they wrote back and said it has a very small antiviral activity. We do not suggest using it. When we responded to the fact that it cleared distemper in a week, actually in 24 hours, there was no response. Just no response at all. And so here again we're talking about a 22 as compared to a shotgun. Our material, I feel, is an immune shotgun as compared to the use of interferon, which is a 22. So understanding that little bit of immune medicine helps dramatically in trying to understand why and how this works. Now what's interesting is it does not work against all viruses. On distemper, it works magnificently well. And so I'm going to go through and explain the making of the serum. We have a word system on how to do it, but that gets confusing. So this is in pictures, and it really is pretty simple. So, using an 8 to 12-month-old mixed breed dog, 60 to 100 pounds. Why that age? For us, it just seemed that at that age, their immune systems were intact, they were functional. We made sure these dogs were not spayed or neutered animals, because spaying and neutering, which we'll get into later, interferes with their immune systems. We liked a dog between 60 and 100 pounds, because no sense doing this in a 10-pound dog, you didn't get enough blood. You needed to get as much blood out as you can, so you get 80%. So a 100-pound dog, 8% will give you about, what, 80 cc's? Well, it gives you more than that, give you about 250 cc's. You spin it down, you get about 110 cc's of serum. So you can only do this once. You can't do this more than once in any dog.
Why is that?
Because you get antibodies to the Newcastle's disease virus. You have vaccinated the dog to a chicken virus, okay? At this particular period of time, 8 to 12 hours, this is not a vaccine. This is an immune storm that you have created inside that dog. That dog has been shocked with a virus, and that immune system, if it's intact, is responding. And the response is incredible. So, do a full lab work, eliminate all possible health problems. You don't want a dog with heartworms. You don't want a dog with Babesia Gibsoni. You don't want a dog that's carrying any kind of an immune problem.
No
Vaccinate
heartworm.
against all diseases, so you're not coming in carrying something, because you're going to give this to a dozen dogs. You don't want to be spreading disease out there, okay? Okay, do not use breeds or individuals known to have immune deficiency problems. Any dog that's got Demodex you don't want to use. By definition, that dog has an immune problem. Why use it? You don't want a dog that has Ascaridus, because they shut down the immune system also, okay? So anyway, that's the answer on that.
Why not heartworm?
Because it's floating around in the serum. It's not in the red cells.
So you just
You're
don't want to
pulling
transfer.
the red cells out.
You just don't want to transfer heartworm to another dog?
Sure. Of course.
But if that was the only thing you had available,
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
if that was the only dog you had available to be a donor, is it worth the heartworm transference to stop?
Remember, we didn't have heartworms where we didn't worry about that at all. I mean, you're talking about our area. We had no fleas, we had no heartworms, we had no ticks to speak of. External parasites, except for Demodex and sarcoptic mange, were rare. We just didn't see it, okay? Didn't have it, so we didn't worry about it. But I certainly wouldn't use a dog that had it, because the chances of you transferring it to somebody else is too great. So this is your inducer. This is the one that we had, and there are several that I have in my files now that you can have. But this is Newcastle's disease virus. This happens to be a Lesotho strain. Why that one? Because that's the one the chicken place that we bought the vaccine from had. It seems to work very well, okay?
It's
What was
easy
the
to
cost?
get to.
Box of 6 costs us about $10, so you're talking about $2 a bottle.
Yeah.
Comes with 20 cc's of diluent, usually 1,000 virus particles in these things. We usually made it up with 6 cc's of diluent and threw the rest of the diluent away. Why? Because it was how much the bottle held. The bottle holds about 6 cc's, okay? So please understand, this was back in the early days. We didn't even understand what the hell we were doing. We didn't understand the immune system. It was totally out of our understanding. Certainly nobody else knew anything about it, okay? This is 1970, 1969 we were doing this. Okay, so that's basically what you use. And there are several sources which we have in the files now. And you can buy this stuff overnight in the United States and have it shipped to you. Okay, so we place an IV catheter in the dog. We inject 2 to 3 cc's in about a 100-pound dog. Why that much? Because that worked pretty well for us. I mean, it's all a priori, just what we've developed. Do not use any corticosteroids. Why? Because that interferes with your immune system. You can have a copy of this. I'll pop this out and give it to you on a disc. Okay? I would have given it to him, but it wouldn't go through the emails.
Oh.
Okay, so there's our surgery. We recommend that you do it as thoroughly as possible. The bottles were given to us by the local lab. Those are 20 cc syringes sitting on the table with 18-gauge needles. They have a, it looks like a splint laying out there. That's a table we put them on their backs to stabilize them. And the dog is, of course, anesthetized. And timing is essential. Timing is everything when you're dealing with immune materials in the body. If you stimulate it with a virus and you pull it off at 6 to 8 hours, you are pulling off interferon. Interferon does not cure distemper. Okay? Does not cure distemper. Under these circumstances, you're making alpha, beta, or gamma. All three at once. If you do this in vitro, you're only making whatever that cell makes. And neutrophils make alpha, fibroblasts make beta, and I forget what the third cell is to make gamma, I can't remember. But in humans now, what they're doing with this material is they're making it in vitro, so they're making a bullet, they're making a .22. What you want is a shotgun. This is a shotgun, okay? 11 to 12 hours post-injection. Put the dog to sleep, get an IV running on them, shave their necks, and what we did was put an IV catheter. This is a jugular catheter. Why did we use that? Because you could pull a lot of blood quickly out of this dog. If you try to do it out of the cephalic vein, you get really slow as you start to get the blood out. It takes you almost 45 minutes to do this. You can do this in about 15 minutes. And so on the one line you're giving fluids, on the other line you're pulling blood, and you pull blood until the dog looks like it's going to go into shock. Okay, you get as much out of the dog as you can because you only get one shot at this. So place the jugular catheter. 11 to 12 hours after you've given the vaccine. Second time around you can't use it because you have antibodies then, and antibodies block what you're trying to do. These Newcastle disease antibodies are useless for any treatment. They don't do anything, okay? Then you take blood, 20 cc syringes. It's immediately put into bottles, okay? 10 cc vials, sterile, no additive, nothing. Just spin down bottles, and you can, the lab usually will give them to you. Allow the blood to clot. Now, in the dog it takes about 30 minutes, in a cat it takes about 10 minutes. And in the cat, if you don't take the blood off immediately, what happens is the red cells begin to lyse, and then you have hemoglobin in there, which you really don't want. So you want it clear. So as soon as it clots, immediately after clotting, spin it down. You want to get the red cells out of there. Why do you want to get the red cells out? Because if you give red cells to a dog that doesn't have the same blood type, they're going to get a reaction. If you use serum, there's no reaction. Species to same species is critical. Okay, that's what it looks like when you take it out. We've pulled the serum off, red cells are left behind. It's put into bottles like that, which are sterile, 10 cc bottles, okay? When you refrigerate this, there are very large proteins in that serum. They're called cryoprecipitates. They make absolutely no difference. You can leave them in there, you can filter them out. We found over time that it made no difference, but there are white precipitates at the bottom, which you can see, and if you shake the bottle, basically what will happen is it'll sort of make the serum cloudy. So you can clear it. So a 0.2 filter micron, you can take it and you can essentially pull the stuff out and leave the cryoprecipitates beside. They're not the immune problem you're looking for. That's not what's there, okay?
I have a question about the cryoprecipitates.
Yeah.
Okay, if you don't filter them out,
makes no difference.
Okay, do you need to shake it up, or you can just leave them in the bottle?
You know, when I pull the serum off, I leave them in the bottom of the bottle as much as possible.
Okay.
If I don't filter them out completely, and I just try to avoid them. There's no reason to avoid them. When you put them into a warm body, they go right back into solution.
Okay.
Okay? Okay, this is how we stored this stuff. This is the crisper in a refrigerator. These are the bottles in baggies. Make sure the tops have got alcoholed off so that they're clean. You don't have any blood left, or you're going to get, you know, secondary mold and stuff on them. You got to be careful of that. But then you just stick them in baggies and put them in the refrigerator. We use stuff 5 years old and had every bit of the control that the original stuff did. So it's good for, as we feel, up to 5 years, probably longer. Somewhere along the way I read you could freeze this stuff and it's good for 30 years. Go figure. I never froze any of this. We kept it this way in a crisper, in a refrigerator. Okay, how do you treat them? Sick dog. You want to get them before the 6th day if possible. If you get them before the 6th day, they're easy to treat. Here's the treatment. Weigh the dog, 1 to 10 pounds. You give 1 cc of the material plus 1 cc for the dog 3 times. Give it 12 hours apart, 3 treatments. By the time you gave the 3rd treatment, they were already well. You could probably get away with 1 treatment, but we used 3. Don't ask me why we used 3, that's just what we set up. It was the way it was. You could probably do it with 1. What is amazing is, look at the amount of material you're talking about. cc of Coca-Cola wouldn't even wet your whistle. And that is enough to set off whatever the immune stuff that's in this stuff to do to get into the dog and trigger all the cells that are necessary to kill the virus intracellularly. Now, I say that to people that have medical training and they say, oh, come on, that's not possible. There it is. You're looking at it. It does, it works. When you realize that you got a problem, what do you do with somebody, say, in France? You can't ship serum. Why don't we try just shooting the dog with the NDV straight? All right, well, here's the problem. Distemper can cause immune failure. That's why you have the disease in the first place. It got in around the disease, around the problem. So if you have a dog that has immune failure, you hit it with NDV, it doesn't make the materials that are necessary, it doesn't clear the disease. Conversely, you got a dog with Demodex, we know that dog's immunodeficient. You hit it with NDV and nothing happens. Dies of distemper. Didn't work. You get other dogs that have genetic problems, combined immunodeficiency problems, you can't treat those dogs. You also really can't treat a dog that's less than puberty, because they haven't gotten to the point where their full T-cell system is developed until they go through puberty. Why is that? I didn't do it, God did it. Okay? But when you get your sex hormones developing, that's when your immune system comes to full fruition. So if you spay a dog at 4 months, you're leaving them susceptible to all kinds of problems.
Do you give it sub-Q or?
No, it has to be IV. Why the difference, I don't know. But sub-Q doesn't seem to work as well. And if you're going to use the NDV virus straight, the dog must not be immunocompromised. It must be old enough that it can respond properly, preferably unspayed up until it had a heat cycle so that you have an intact immune system. What else can I tell you about that? Any dog under the age of 16 weeks, it probably won't work, although it does work in some, but not all, because those dogs just can't respond properly. And so if you don't have access to serum, that's the next best thing to do. Now, if you're talking about NDV, it doesn't work all the time, and you can only do it once. So if the dog develops a problem later on, you can't use NDV again. You can't use it. You have to use something else.
You couldn't go to the serum for the second time?
You're just going to have to bring the
You can use a serum multiple times. Okay, so here we are. Doesn't treat parvo. We bathed dogs in parvo with this stuff. I mean, we gave them hundreds of cc's and had no effect, okay? I strongly recommend that the serum be used over the NDV if it's at all possible. The only reason to use NDV is if you can't get hold of the serum. If you don't have access to the way to stop it, you give the inducer. But here's the problem. It doesn't work in every case because it depends on the ability of the animal to respond to the inducer. And virus diseases screw with the intestine, with the immune system. And if it does it just right, if you give it the inducer, nothing happens. Now you say, well, the technique doesn't work. Well, yeah, it didn't work in that case. But if you use the serum, doesn't matter what the immune system is, you're whacking it with that shotgun. And all those systems, and I gotta show you, because you got 5 pages of what we knew in 2005 about what the immune system is doing that we knew then. And I guarantee you there's 10 times that's out there we don't know yet. Right. Okay? I guarantee it, because in 1969 when we did this, we knew 3 interferons. That's all we knew. HIV got funded by billions of dollars from the federal government, and they found all kinds of things. Did they learn everything? Not a chance. Not a chance. They keep finding new stuff all the time. Every time a book is published, they got 5 more pages of this stuff.
Right, but right now at 8 weeks, we give them the distemper vaccine.
Yep.
And then we do the boosters. Would you rather us use a serum instead?
No, serum is only used to treat infected dogs showing symptoms.
Okay.
All the serum does is kill the virus.
Okay.
Gives you a chance to recover. Vaccine is supposed to prevent it. So in between prevention and treatment, you got that space of time when the dog is infected maybe and no symptoms. Now, if you know that it's been exposed and you know it's going to break next week, that would make you prescient. And I got news for you, I don't have that kind of ability.
Right.
I have to see a symptom. Runny nose, pneumonia, fever, that's the first one to show up. Crappy eyes and crapping of the nose, those are the other 2 that show up immediately. Okay, when you see a dog with his nose all gummed up, chances are he's got distemper, but could have parvo, could have herpes, could have flu, could have parainfluenza. Okay, do you know which one it is? Okay, so where are we here? Here's a dog. That's day 1, hour 1, distemper case. How do we identify this? What is this? How do we know that's distemper and not herpes? Okay, that became the major test. If you send the serum to the lab, it takes 2 to 3 to 5 days to get the answer back. Now you're into day 6, 7 already. Too late to treat. So what have you done in the meantime? You gave him antibiotics, you gave him fluids. Is he still sick? Yeah, he's still sick. Okay? Or you get a conjunctival smear and you send it in for IFA. How long does that take? 3 to 4 days. Dog's still sick. Now you're up to day 4, 5, or 6 again. So again, you're pushing the limits of what your stuff can do. So we stopped and looked at this and tried to figure out how we could handle this. And what we decided was, 1, you pull the blood from the dog to send to the lab. Then you immediately treat the dog. Treat the dog immediately, because if you're wrong, it doesn't make any difference. If you're right, by tomorrow the dog's well. That makes sense. Doesn't cause any harm, and yet it clears the dog. And if it's one of the other viruses and it doesn't do anything, so what? Okay? Now, you need to know whether you have distemper or not. And what we realized was there are several areas where the distemper virus is always found. It's usually found in the conjunctiva. It's almost always found in the macrophages in the lung, but you've got to get that out, and it's hard to do. But there's an easy place to look, and that's in the bladder. The transitional cells in the bladder are highly sensitive and highly reactive to the virus. They always have the virus. So if you have distemper in the acute phase, and you pull cells out of the bladder, which is as easy as passing a catheter, drain the urine out, run it back and forth against the bladder wall, get some cells loose, suck them up into the catheter, bring them out, put them on a slide, dry it, stain them with Diff-Quick, which is every veterinary hospital's got Diff-Quick. The cells with the virus will have red inclusions alongside the nucleus, 80–90% of them. Easy to diagnose. If they're not there, it's not distemper. Easy. If they're there, it's distemper. Come on, what could be easier than that? It's a 10-minute test, 20-minute test. 15-minute test. Simple, fast, yes or no. Okay, in the meantime, you sent the stuff to the lab. Now you've treated the dog, okay? If he had inclusions, tomorrow he's better. If he didn't have inclusions, is he better or not? Yes.
Does that show up before anything else, those inclusions, like before a discharge from the nose or the eyes?
They show up from the very first minute you see any clinical symptoms, and they last about 10 days in the bladder. After that, they sort of tend to start to disappear. So if you're talking about a dog with seizures, you're not going to find them. And if you look at a dog that's out 21 days, chances are you're not going to find a lot of them.
I'm talking about a dog, say, that you get that looks you think there's something wrong with it, but you can't put your finger on it. It doesn't show any outward symptoms except the
Do a bladder study.
The dog is not.
If he's got a fever,
It's got a fever and its eyes are dull.
Okay, now look, if he's got a fever, it isn't kennel cough. Kennel cough does not give you a fever, okay? 2 diseases, 3 diseases give you a fever. Distemper, herpes, flu. dog flu. It's starting to show everywhere. Looks like distemper. It's got a fever, runny nose, cough. Okay, is it distemper or is it flu?
Right.
How do you tell?
Take the test.
Well, you can't tell herpes or flu, but you can tell distemper.
Yeah.
Okay, so what you do is you do the bladder test, and if they're not there, it's either herpes or flu. Well, the stuff clears herpes. I'll show you that later. But I don't know about the flu because I never got a chance to treat a case. It started out in Florida, and it's moving back this way across the country, and I retired before it ever got to California, so I don't know. It will slow down para-influenza, which is one of the other kennel cough viruses. Slow it down to the point where it can make it go away. It does treat herpes, and I'll show you respiratory cases of herpes, okay? But how do you know which one it is? Come on, your vet can't tell. He says, hey, you got kennel cough. He gives you an antibiotic, sends you home. 2 weeks later, you're back, your dog's still vomiting, his nose is worse, now he's got pneumonia. Oh, he says, maybe it wasn't kennel cough, it must have been distemper. Too late. Too late. Now, what are you going to do? If you treat, you may get rid of it, you may not. Your dog is probably going to get neurologic problems, and he's going to say, euthanize it. By that time, you spent $700. Okay, maybe more. Okay, so that's the way the dog looks. That's the dog the same day. That's the dog the next day. Next day. So you asked me, where are our clinical proofs? Don't treat that dog, that's a clinical proof.
Just looking at
That
the
case.
nostrils,
That
just
case.
the nostrils alone.
Antibiotics and fluid, going to help that?
Mm-mm.
You're going to wipe its nose with Kleenex? Going to give it a kiss on the head? Going to feed it special food? Going to give it a big IV? You're going to give it vitamin B12, vitamin C? Dog's going to die.
Yeah.
All right, here we are. Now what?
Call Dr. Sears.
Okay, so you want to know where the controls are? All those other cases treated by all those veterinarians across the world are your controls. Across the world. Send that dog home within 24 hours. And then they're going to take this dog to another vet and they're going to say, they treated me for distemper. They say, oh, come on. Didn't have distemper. That's what they're going to tell them.
Right.
All right, so these are distemper types. Can you see that up there? No.
Well, just tell us about it.
Okay, let me read this to you. The most common type of distemper that we saw routinely, young unvaccinated dogs or dogs recently vaccinated from pounds. Pound dogs will show up 7 days after release. Dogs with all the recognizable symptoms of pneumonia, catarrh, KS, which is the dry eye, fever 102 or higher, diarrhea, collapse, inclusions in the bladder, elevated antidysterum, IgG, IgM. In some cases from pound dogs, there may be no titers, in other words, less than 1 to 5 IgG and IgM. Usually these dogs have very high titers when checked 2 weeks later. They are distemper cases and should be treated even though previously vaccinated. So dogs we got out of the pounders that came with full-blown symptoms. I mean, what's distemper? That's a distemper case. You look at it and say, ah, it's a distemper case. But they had dogs that came out of there that didn't have titers. In the early days, we did titers on everybody. So anybody with more than a 1 to 10 IgM and a 1 to 40 IgG was considered a distemper case, yes.
Explain titers and IgG.
Okay, we're talking about antibodies. Remember, when you get sick, you got macrophages that break it up, give it to a T cell. T cell then makes a cytokine, tells the B cell to make an antibody. The antibody goes to a plasma cell. Plasma cell explodes antibodies into the body, makes tons of antibody, and that's what you're looking for. So in an active infection, you've got very high titers of antibody, okay, before the feedback and it breaks down. But in the initial stages, that's where it is. So a vaccine will give you something less than 1 to 5 on the IgM, and usually less than 1 to 20 on the IgG. Shot. Because now you're stimulating the antibody. That's what you're doing, okay? But the disease will usually drive it higher. So you're talking 1 to 10 IgM, which is the first 5 or 6 days of antibodies. That's the first one. Then IgG comes in, and it'll climb higher than 1 to 40, and I've seen 1 to 16,000. Now,
what's IgG and what's IgM again?
IgM is a circular form of antibody that shows up first in the body to try to isolate the virus. And remember, it cannot get into the cell where the virus is. It simply keeps virus from floating around in the body. That's all it does. It's the first one to show up. Second one to show up is IgG, and there are multiple IgGs, but IgG basically they measure it as just that. And it shows up, and it will go very high in a street infection and only go to about, probably 1 to 20 with a vaccination at max. That was originally. So after we'd shot the dogs, we could say, yeah, it had distemper. Here's one that had a very high titer and a very low titer. Then about 10 years after we were into doing this, a lady vet from Arizona called me and said, I had titers of 1 to 350, and I shot the dog and there was no change. And it made me suspicious, so I checked my old dog at home. It had 1 to 350. And I checked the puppy that came in that had no vaccinations. It had 1 to 350. And I checked the next door neighbors, and their dog had been vaccinated 5 years ago, and it had 1 to 350. What does that mean? And I said, God, I don't know. You got me by surprise. So the next couple of dogs that came in that were vaccinated or unvaccinated, we pulled serum, we sent it to the lab, and guess what? They all came back 1 to 350. What does that mean? It means the lab is screwing up. You have to remember, the labs are not infallible. They're not infallible. Everybody had 1 to 350. Sick, vaccinated, unvaccinated, puppy, old dog, made no difference. 1 to 350. Everybody didn't have distemper. Okay? So what you say to yourself is, the lab is screwing up. So I put in here, let's see here, 2. Some labs will return an IgG of 1 to 350, whether vaccinated or not, sick or not, young or old. So if this titer comes back from the lab, ignore it. It's not valid. Do a bladder cell study instead. I had to put it in there because, God, that means everybody's sick. Not possible, okay? So let's go to 3. Okay. The next one down is a mild nondescript disease, shows transient signs, often not regulated or recognized in early stages, quick recovery, can be confused with kennel cough. The secondary symptoms appear later, up to 8 years later. And you can either see chorea, demyelination, hard pad, nasal symptoms, pneumonia, ocular, dental symptoms, KS, old dog encephalitis, see neurology below. So that's the disease we were talking about from the other part of the desert where they got sick for 2 days. You didn't know it was distemper. Then they got better. Then 6 to 8 years later, bang, here comes the neurologic form of it, okay? We saw lots of those cases because they all came out of one triangle out there in the desert. So those dogs, whether vaccinated or not, broke with this little mild symptom, which the owners usually didn't even bring them into the hospital, and later on they got neurologic problems, okay? And we saw a lot of those, and that's the 8-year-old dog I took down to Dr. Adams, okay? Okay, so 3, new form of distemper. Relatively rare, older adult dog, fully vaccinated multiple times, breaks with some symptoms of distemper. The exposure factor is unknown, possibly wild species exposure. Maybe a new strain of distemper. See distemper in lions and felines. Remember I told you we had that feline compound that broke? We feel that that may have gotten into the coyotes. This came back to some of my breeders that had multiple dogs up against the national forest in big enclosures, and they would all be thoroughly vaccinated, and 1 or 2 dogs would break with symptoms of distemper. Now, you walk into a vet and say, I've got an 8-year-old dog that's been vaccinated every year for distemper. What's the matter with it? And you look at it and say, oh my God, it's been vaccinated. It can't be distemper. Scratch. Distemper, no. Aha, but yes, it is. How do you know? The bladder won't be positive. It's an older dog. It's vaccinated. No bladder signs. It's going to have pneumonia. It's going to have a fever. Looks like distemper. Treat it like distemper. It'll get better instantly. Don't treat it, and it'll probably die of encephalitic lesions within a couple of weeks. Okay? I saw probably 8 of these cases. Only 8 in 40 years. But they made us wake up and pay attention because they were unusual. Is that a new virus? Why not call it a new virus? Coming out of the wild animals in that area, maybe the forest of California? I don't know. Can't answer the question. We never had it typed because in those days we didn't have the ability to do the genome, so we didn't know. Okay, so okay, so here's an information on vaccine type. This is the other one we were talking about. Vaccine type, no pneumonia, no inclusions in body or bladder, seizures, inclusions in brain, No other pathology found upon autopsy. ELISA tests for distemper inclusions, antibody, and the CSF are positive. In the early days, we had a SNAP test for distemper antibodies. It came out. So you could take a dog and you could take its blood and put it in, snap it, and if it came up positive, it had distemper antibodies. Ah, that was a great test. We figured out we could do it with the CSF. So we draw CSF, put it in the test, snap it. When they had ODE, it went positive. And when they didn't have it, it went negative. Problem is, they pulled it off the market. Then we didn't have it anymore, okay? So, distemper types. Vaccine-induced, okay? You have no inclusions anywhere in the body. Not in the bladder, not in the lungs, not in the kidneys, not anywhere. The brain, yes, usually showed up 2 to 3 weeks after a shot. It still happens. In my opinion, it's a genetic screw up in the dog some way. They can't handle the vaccine. It gets through the blood-brain barrier. I don't know how it does it. It's rare. I personally have seen a bunch of cases. I described to him earlier about cases I took down to the pathologist personally that I gave the vaccine to, and I knew that what they had. I've heard of one from Ireland. I got one from France, and I think I got one from Korea. And that's what I've heard. Now, a lot of those, I'm sure, are either misdiagnosed or they're put down as being street virus, but it's the vaccine that does it, and there's no way to know who's going to happen to, but it does happen. It's probably one in about 3,000 or 4,000 dogs. Okay, it's not common. Now, here are causes of seizures in dogs that are not distemper. So everybody that seizes isn't distemper. These are causes of seizures in dogs. Can you see that? How many cases do you have on there? 40? At least? So when you say, oh, the dog is seizing, must have distemper. Not a chance. Now, if it's 4 months old and it hasn't been vaccinated and it came out of the pound, I'll give you odds. Okay? But you get a 5 or 6 year old dog that was, in a kennel for 3 days and it comes out, one of those. How about walking through any of the mountain areas in California or Colorado for 4 days? Look at the list. Okay, so everybody that seizes is in distemper, all right? Next.
I'd like to know if there's any way to bring them back if they're having neurologic symptoms.
Let's go to neurologic problems. Here's a brain. That's what we're talking about. That's a brain, okay? There's a neuron, there's an axon. The white stuff you see around the edge is the myelin. Insulation, fatty material. What it does is it insulates the electrical currents going down the neurons so that they can go very fast. From the tip of your toe to your brain takes less than a microsecond. You pinch your toe, oh, it hurts. Why does it go that fast? It's traveling all the way up, all the way back. Make you jerk your foot back, okay? That's a protected neuron. It's got insulation on it. Take the insulation off, can't do that.
You've got a dog, comes to you, diagnosed with distemper, having seizures. What do you do? Take us through it step by step.
The sooner you treat it, the better chance you have of control. If you wait till later and there's enough damage, the dog's going to die regardless. You've got 4 kinds. The one coming up the backbone, you got to do it pretty quick because once it reaches up into the thoracic area, it turns off the ability to breathe, and you're not going to do anything to save that dog. The optic neuritis, it turns out it treats it really quickly. We're talking sometimes less than a week. These dogs go back to being sighted, and I find that extraordinary, okay? The seizuring dogs, I think it would take a little bit longer. The ones that we treated in Indonesia, the seizuring dog was also blind. It regained its eyesight within a matter of a week or so. The seizuring took about 4 to 6 weeks to come under control. The dog with chorea, I'm trying to think of the amount of time. I think it was 4 to 6 weeks also, and the chorea stopped on that dog. And that dog was paralyzed in the hind legs when we treated. It could not walk, okay, and it did walk. The dog we treated there could not walk, could not see, was sighted and walking within a matter of 2 weeks, the one we treated in UCLA. Mm-hmm. So that's been documented but never printed, never published. If you have a dog with seizures and you suspect that you're dealing with distemper, remember that list I showed you? Right. Because it could be any of those things. You want to tap the brain, you want to give it an anesthetic, prep it for surgery. You want to tap the brain, and you do that by doing it through the foramen magnum, and you want to pull some of that material off. You want to get some. Then you take the same needle, leave it where it is, and you put in about a half a cc, depending on the size of the dog, of active NDV virus into the brain. then you follow it with a flush of saline. Why that? So that essentially you flush the needle and you get it all in there, because the needle's going to have about probably 0.2 cc stuck in it, and you don't want it left in the needle. Okay. Now I had somebody write to me and say they made the NDV up with saline rather than the distilled water, and they didn't get any seizures. My experience is that every time you put NDV into a dog, you're going to get seizures. Okay, so you need to have a catheter into them for fluids, and you need to have them anesthetized when you do it. Okay, but this individual wrote to me and said we gave it with saline mixed with the NDV. It worked just as well, and we didn't have any secondary effects from it.
You're talking about putting the needle into the spinal canal.
Spinal canal, yes,
right.
not the spinal cord, but
right.
the canal.
Big concern is whether or not you might nick the spinal cord.
Yeah, that's called pithing. Yeah.
Right. Now,
yeah,
you
right.
need
So
to
somebody
use,
that knows how to do that needs to do it.
Right. Do they need to use ultrasound, or can they just? Do they need to use an ultrasound to guide the needle, or can it be done?
No, I did it without an ultrasound for years without a problem, because I also did spinal surgery. Okay, we drop needles in, and you can close your eyes, and you got the dog in position. You got your fingers on it, and you got the needle right where you want it, and you can feel your way down the bone. And you pop right through there's a thick membrane there. You can feel it pop right through that, and you don't need to go any further. You're there, and then what happens is the fluid comes up through the needle. Okay, so we would put a catheter on the needle and pull the fluid off. Mm-hmm. Okay, because that way you didn't bother the needle. Then we would pull the catheter out and inject the NDV into the needle. Now, 0.2 of it's stuck in the needle, okay? Probably 1/10 because you're using a very tiny needle. Then flush it with a little saline, then just pull the needle out. I mean, the whole thing takes 5 minutes, 2 minutes. Okay. The trick is to walk it down.
So it's like a spinal tap, but up in the brain area. It's like a spinal tap.
It is a spinal tap.
But in the brain
It is a
area.
spinal tap. Exactly what it is.
So that pop that you
now,
feel.
I've had some people that weren't quite as adept injure the neural cord, and the dog had trouble walking for, just cut his legs off, literally. And then I had another case where the dog had been in the field with cows, and so had cow shit all over it, and apparently the guy didn't clip it and prep it for surgery, and they got tetanus from putting the needle in. So the dog had tetanus, okay? So he says, does the NDV cause tetanus? No, it doesn't. But that doesn't mean you can't get tetanus when you don't do it cleanly. It requires that you do this in a surgical manner.
Now, before the spinal tap, is it important to do an NDV shot to the body before you do that?
No.
Okay.
You're assuming at this point that the dog has recovered, and that's why he's alive. He's lived long enough to get secondary problems. Okay? Just because you get a virus in the brain doesn't mean you have a problem immediately. You have to kill that cell, and you've got to demyelinate before you're going to see any short-circuiting. That's why you have a variation in the severity of the lesions. So you may get one dog that's got a leg like that, or you may have a dog that's got a total body twitch, all the way down to a dog that can't use his hind legs at all, and slowly comes up. He can't do anything until he can't breathe because it's affecting the cord from down to up.
Let me walk it through possible steps here. The owner rescues a dog. It has what looks like kennel cough.
It's on antibiotics and fluids, and you go out 2 weeks.
And the nose is getting gunked up, and the pads are getting hard. And then the seizures hit.
Well, first of all, we're assuming that the nose clears up and that he's been treated for pneumonia. He's got hard pad, and it's still a little bit bad. Doesn't look all that terrible.
What if those symptoms are still around and you've got seizures?
Then I have had cases that were treated after 21 days, had the hard pad go away.
Okay.
But still develop seizures.
Okay. But you don't need to do 2 shots, like one for the body and one for...
Yeah, you do. They're 2 different immune systems totally.
Okay.
They are not connected. You can have antibodies in the body, cannot cross into the brain. You can have antibodies in the brain, do not cross into the body. Right. So if you give a shot to a dog and you create encephalitic distemper, there are no antibodies in the body. There's no infection in there. It's in the brain.
So if you've got a dog with both the body symptoms and the neurological symptoms, we're going to have to do both.
You know what, that question has arisen a lot recently because there are a lot of animals that are essentially caught late. They're not caught early.
Right.
And in answer to your question, I would say probably yes. I would treat them systemically because it helps get rid of the secondaries that are still left out there. Remember, there are multiple systems in the body that are involved. Okay, and that would just take, 24 hours to stop, and then I would wait probably 4 or 5 days, and then I would treat the neurology part. But now you're supposing that it's not collapsing quickly, okay, that the dog is going to live long enough for the results to respond, all right? That's what you're supposing.
Right. What
Because
if I
you're
can't
making- you're
suppose
making
that?
it- you're ma- Well, if you've got a dog's going to die.
Right.
I mean, you
So-
start getting into major seizures, you're going to die. It may not be right away, but you're going to die within a month.
So would you recommend then getting both shots closer together rather than wait to see if the one has the...
I don't know because I haven't treated enough of those to know. Okay, here, of the 2 cases that we had to be confirmed for distemper of the brain from the dog that was in Indonesia, I had to call the lab, who was the head of the lab, was a friend of somebody who was related to me in school, and he ran this on the CSF, and there's the confirmation that this was distemper, because we had to have that. If we didn't have that, people would say, well, how do you know it was distemper? There it is. Okay? Okay, and I got another one. That's just one of them. There were 2 dogs that we had this came in. This guy had the vet pull the CSF and had it sent to me. I called the lab down there. Here's the other one. And they said, yeah, I'll run it. He had to do PCR on this to expand it in order to find it, but they found it. There it is. That's out of the CSF on this dog.
They're going to test
Remember, we have
positive.
2 separate compartments. If you have a titer of 1 to 1600 in the system, you do not have a titer in the brain. So, you have to have distemper virus in the brain to get antibody in the neural system. We ran this because we had to have confirmation that the dogs that came under control truly had distemper in the brain. There's the confirmation.
Distemper dog survived for a few years, still is having seizures. It's all still within the spinal canal. Can you help that dog?
You can help those dogs out to 8 years. We got dogs, that first dog we treated was 8 years old when he got his first symptoms. 8 years. And he'd been sick for probably 6 weeks when we took him down to UCLA. People said, I donate him. Okay?
Was he vaccinated?
Probably as a puppy, but they couldn't remember when he'd had the disease, but he came out of that area where we were seeing cases of these slight sniffles in dogs that were 8 to 10 weeks of age, right when you're supposed to give them the first shot, and they weren't sick. Okay, some of them didn't even come in to see the vet. And you'd say to them, was this dog ever sick? Well, he had a little sniffle when he was, 6 weeks ago. Didn't worry about it. Now, when you put NDV into the brain, you kill the virus. In the ventricles, there are stem cells for the brain. Really? Yeah, really. What do? They replace cells that die. So the stem cells, in the absence of the virus, can make that cell back again, which then makes myelin, because that's what it does. How interesting can that get? Isn't that fascinating?
What's basically I'm saying is grateful for what you've done because you've kept the system alive. And basically, eventually, somebody's going to pick this up and run with it because this all developed back in the early 70s, and here we are 2009, and it hasn't progressed hardly at all from that period of time.
And what can people do to thank you?
What can people do?
To thank you.
To thank me? Make it available to everybody. Make sure that people know about it, make sure people are using it, make sure they stop this disease. That's how they can thank me. I'm only giving back what was given to me over the last couple of decades. And one, in education from the state of California, which I always appreciate. And two, all the breeders that worked with me over the last 40 years with this, because this didn't happen instantaneously. The breeders helped dramatically with this. Thank God for breeders.
Hi. You know, Galen used to love to lie out in the sun. In fact, this was one of his favorite spots, right here where I'm standing. He spent a lot of time right here, especially in his last days before he was put to sleep in the fall of 2006, 9 years after he was treated by Dr. Sears. But that wasn't the end of the story. The end of the story is up to you. Dr. Sears and his treatments have saved many other dogs. But that's not enough. This video was made with an audience in mind. In part, the audience is the pet owners, the ones who are desperate to save their animals from this terrible disease. This is meant to give you hope and some education about the possibilities of this treatment. It is also meant as an instructional material for the breeders, the shelters, and the veterinary clinics out there dealing with this disease, fighting in the trenches, trying to save the lives of animals. We hope that this is a weapon that will help you in your battle against canine distemper. But in a way, this video is also created with an audience of one in mind. One researcher that we need to find. One scientist. One veterinary professional or academic who can look at this and understand that maybe there's something here. Maybe there's a way of stopping canine distemper in its tracks. If that one person who has the right contacts, the right insight to understand how to take this from where it is now, where it is unaccepted and unpublished, to a point where it can be accepted and published, we can create a world in which veterinary clinics across the U.S. and the world will have a way of saving dogs from canine distemper. Dog owners who come into a veterinary clinic will no longer be told, well, your dog has canine distemper and there isn't that much that can be done. Instead, they'll be told, your dog has canine distemper, but we have treatments that can save your dog. That's the world that I imagine. A world in which thousands of dogs could be saved from this disease. Please, let's make it happen. Thank you.
Take a break, ease your mind, that's the only way to find what you need. And instead of sitting asking why, never know until you try. It'd be better if you'd ever get started. Waste of time being blue, if it to be, it's up to you. Would you please keep the faith? It's just over the next hill, right on the horizon. Do you see it when you close your eyes? Keep the faith, it's on its way, yeah. It would be amazing to find the power of the mind that's doing battle with that box in the corner. Ever heard loud and clear, you must have a purpose here. Well, it's true, and you only have to plant the seed, let the flowers kill the weeds. And do forgive me if that's too California, but I know without a doubt what goes in is what goes out.